Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. I have 14 minutes left, 3 minutes left and counting. So what I've been asked to do is give you a really tiny overview of some of the work around just culture and why we bother with this to begin with. In the process, I'm going to introduce you to the extent that you don't know that already, but to Joe, of course, and his organization, Merseycare, which was courageous enough to try this for real and actually look at some of the results really quickly, because again, we're counting time here. This is the type of thing that gets us interested in the work I'm going to talk to you about. This happens more than with the general population, as you know, and in fact, the previous talk, ladies, thank you for that beautiful talk. It was the best keynote for the types of things I want to share with you. I've written, in fact, a book called Second Victim, so there you go. And of course, I have written Just Culture, which shows up in a second. This is Julie, you may know her case, Julie Theo. I just want you to look briefly at her face. All right, she's looking at the mother of the victim. The victim is a 16-year-old who died in her care. And Julie is a nurse, no longer here, of course, license yanked and fired. But look at her face, 1,000 words, right? Now, Julie is still alive today, but when it comes to second victimhood, and you guys described it really well, you wrapped up the literature beautifully, she would be described as muddling through, right? Neither thriving nor dropping out, but muddling through from day to day. The pain, the burden, very heavy on her. What I find fascinating is the amount of compassion that her face expresses. I feel for you, mother. I feel for you. I feel the pain that you feel. I would want to share it with you. And one of the things that burns me most about pictures like these is that this is how we as society seem to believe that we can hold each other accountable. But can Julie hold her account? Can she hold her account? There's absolutely no way in which a meaningful account and a meaningful accounting of the event can take place in a setting that is adversarial, in which you cannot self-incriminate, in which you have to shut up, in which the lawyers will tell you exactly what to say and what not to say, particularly what not to say. When I look at Julie, and I know Julie, she would want to give the mother a big hug. That's what she wants to do. And cry. That's what she would want to do. And we've configured ourselves in institutional responses to this type of harm that make that fundamentally impossible. This is what I am passionate to change. Hence, breaking the silence. You've mentioned it already. The fact that there still is silence around nurse suicide in itself is interesting data, by the way, right? So I'll leave that to you to consider. But this is very recent, as you see. So let's talk about just culture and the restoration of trust and accountability in settings in which particularly clinicians, but all kinds of other practitioners, because this work is driven not just by clinicians, indeed pilots, police, military, firefighters, train drivers, the type of things and research that animates this thinking. This is typical for our responses to failure. Who screwed up? Which rule is broken, right? Who did it? How bad was that breach? Oh, they've done it 3 times last week already. Really, 3 times? Well, in that case, we have a repeat offender, right? So what did we do with a repeat offender? We need to do something. Well, clearly this is a dysfunctional person, right? To get rid of this person, get rid of the bad apple. Which rule is broken? How bad is it? Who did it? And what should the consequences be? And then we think that we can somehow exact accountability and justice by having a proportional response to whatever the supposed infraction was. And the typical response is suspension, firing, putting on administrative leave, and creating very much all of the issues that you guys so nicely described. So when I go through institutions that provide care for a living, which is rather paradoxical and in some sense ironic, these are often the words, the concepts, the ideas around which post-event discussions are organized. Investigation, hearing, witness, allegations, recklessness, negligence, misconduct, disciplinary action. And these are institutions that provide care for a living. And this is what they do. An amateurish, absolutely not thought through adoption of retributive justice in the wake of harm, where they meet suffering with inflicting more suffering. We're not on this earth for a long time. Is that what we're called to do? Is that who we want to be? My claim, colleagues, is this, is that if we want to just get our fingernails behind that one little corner of the possibilities for suicide prevention, get in early, change the governance and the policies by which you respond to harm in your institutions, and you will set people on a pathway to recovery and restoration rather than to decline and suicide ideation. That's my claim. And Joe was courageous enough to go test that claim. Because what about these sorts of ideas? What about learning, team, review, humanity, collegiality? What a novel idea. Forgiveness, understanding, restoration, healing, trust. What if we organize responses to harm around concepts like these? Can that be done? Yes. Does it take courage? Yes. Are you going to be part of that? I hope so. I hope so. If you flip it, these are the questions that restorative justice asks, right? Not who screwed up, how bad is it, and how big is the stick that we should beat them with? Until morale improves, right? Just keep beating them. Morale will improve at some point. The question is, who is hurt? What do they need? Whose obligation is it to meet that need? And how do we involve the community in resolving that together? Those are the questions around which responses in the wake of harm should be organized. Who's hurt? What do they need? Whose obligation is it to meet that need? And how do we involve the community? And when you start asking that question seriously about who is hurt and be open-minded about it, a whole bunch of people is hurt in the wake of harm. Institutions are hurt, organizations are hurt, roles are hurt. Families, caregivers, colleagues and caregivers, lots of people are hurt. Different types and levels of hurt. Lots of people are hurt. Whose obligation is it to go meet the needs that arise from those hurts? So rather than organizing a response around rules and violations and consequences, the argument I'm making is that we should organize responses around hurts, needs, and obligations. That is an institution that contributes to zero suicide. All right. I think it works even in near misses, when hurt wasn't inflicted, but when you can still go and step back and say, whoa, okay, this was bad, but it could have been much worse. How much worse could it have been? What else could have happened? Who else could have been hurt? What do we need to do now? And who do we involve in doing that? These are not very strange questions to ask if you have managerial or supervisory responsibilities in a clinic, in an institution. What it boils down to is what Ginny Sharp beautifully calls forward-looking accountability. Right? It's accountability that's about the future, not accountability that's about what has already happened. It's really easy to hold each other accountable for what has already happened. Say, you screwed up. You should have zigged, but you zagged. Next time, you really have to try a little bit harder. Right? Watch more intensely. Intervene more aggressively. Right? And then we have policies around it and more rules. And do you know that an anesthesiologist, if you want to read all the rules applicable to providing anesthesia in the Western world, do you know how long you're reading if you're reading 8 hours a day? Somebody's done the research on this, by the way. Give me a guess. How long are you reading? It takes longer than to qualify as an anesthesiologist, but 30 years. Not bad, not bad. Any going once, going twice? 2,000 years. I'm not making this up. I have the paper on my computer. 2,000 years of reading. All right? So, so you're baby Jesus, you say, Mother Mary, I want to be, manage pain and suffering in the future. Right? That's deep at many levels, but, and Mother Mary says, oh, you better start reading if you want to practice in 2018, baby. All right? So, all right, this is probably for later in the evening when the lights are lower and there's a beer. And so we're going to do a bit of stand up here, but I'm out of time, almost. So, forward-looking accountability, rather than saying, this is where you screwed up, you should have done this, you should have zigged instead of zagged. That's backward-looking accountability. Forward-looking accountability is saying, who is going to do what now? And how do we know that it's going to be done? And when are we going to check in? And who's going to do that? And what conversation flows forth from that? It's forward-looking accountability. It's a type of accountability that is constructive and productive rather than retributive and backward-looking. All right? In fact, you could draw out the distinction even more and say, rather than meeting hurt with more hurt or suffering with more suffering, let's meet suffering and hurt with healing. Isn't that ultimately what we're about? Isn't that why we do what we do? Isn't that the ideal that once attracted us to the job, the profession, the role, the vocation that we have? To meet hurt with healing? Yes, we can throw it all on HR, right? Which stands for human remains, by the way. That's, yeah, you make a note of that? Okay, it's not going to make you friends in certain places, but that's okay. I think we can think about accountability in very many ways, obviously. But as I already alluded to with the picture of Julie, you can either think about an account as something you pay and settle, right? And that's retributive thinking and backward-looking accountability. You have to settle your account because you were involved in the death or the incident that happened here. And so now you have to pay or settle that account. But we are not interested in your account. We're not interested in you telling your account. But that, as you illustrated beautifully with psychological first aid and debriefing, is what people want to do. They want to tell their account. They want to learn. They want to confess, repent. They want to tell their account. Accountability is multiple things. And it's lovely about the English language as opposed to Dutch or other Germanic languages, right? Verantwoording or whatever. Very difficult to make that distinction. Ultimately, I think rather than asking who is responsible, in any institutional complex system setting, we need to ask what is responsible, not who is responsible. What is responsible for this incident? Just imagine the conversations you're going to have if you ask that question. No, we rule out who is responsible questions. All right? I know it's the knee-jerk. Stop it. Stop the reflex. What is responsible? And then talk. All right? That's the discussion to have. The goals of that sort of restorative justice are very, very clear. The first is moral engagement of all the participants. We don't just have a practical problem, an HR problem, a reputational problem, a financial problem, a liability problem. Yes, you have all that. But most importantly is that you have a moral problem because somebody's hurt and that hurt needs healing. That raises questions of what is the right thing to do now for us? And as soon as you ask questions about what is the right thing to do, you face a moral dilemma, not a practical or a HR or a liability one. What is the right thing to do now? It's a moral engagement of the stakeholders. Emotional healing. Reintegration of the practitioner. Can we get you back in the saddle? I myself come from worlds in which that is the major question, right? Because it's expensive to train these people. This goes for many things that you do as well. But it's expensive. You don't want to lose these practitioners because you lose a lot of money. You've just invested 13 years in getting them ready for the role. You don't want them to get out. No, back in the saddle. What can we do to get you back in the saddle? And of course, ultimately, organizational system-level learning. Those should be the goals. Retribution and asking what rule is violated and who screwed up and how bad it is does absolutely nothing to serve those purposes. In fact, it undermines your achievement of those goals dramatically. All right? Don't go there. Try to get here. So let's go to Joe. Joe started reading this stuff and his organization quite a while ago and said, we need to engage with this. We need to try to do this restorative practice in our own organization. Joe will be talking tomorrow, and perhaps your next meeting, there'll be an opportunity to look more in the details of some of the stuff that they've done. Frozen suspensions, disciplinary actions, investigations replaced where possible by conversations, encourage staff to come forward to seek support. Interesting, by the way, vis-a-vis the talk that we just had before the break. Appointed self-nominated ambassadors for just culture. Purged, interestingly, still working on that one, purging judgmental language from policies and HR documentation. There's a lot of judgmental language in there. You start looking, you go, oh man, that's pretty low-hanging fruit. build an internal platform for sharing not just failures, but also successes, right? How do you learn from your successes? Because very often we're keen to understand why things go wrong, but actually there's more to learn from that which goes right, and then to identify and enhance the capacities that make it so, right? Why did this go right? What was there in the team that made it go right, right? And I know that M&M conferences do that sometimes, but at other team levels, virtually absent.
Our core in Merseycare is behavioural health, from core talking therapies right through to one of 3 high-secure mental health hospitals.
Which are challenging, busy, quite often dangerous.
Patients thought things were crawling all over them.
People don't really understand them. What I've done is try and help to make that better.
Coming into the health sector, you have to recognise how things work.
I was involved in a recent incident where I'd made a mistake.
The sort of the management culture was quite an intimidating kind of bullying management system.
It's really easy when you're in our jobs to ask, I wonder who was at the back of that.
You looked at the data on a piece of paper, you looked at the numbers as numbers, and you go into a clinical environment and those numbers become people.
I was informed that there was allegations made against me.
And HR's response was, well, you're actually under investigation. That was the first I knew of it.
I wasn't sort of ready and expecting the response from the trust to suspend the staff.
The day I was suspended was the worst day of my working life.
So there's really 2 ways in which you can do just culture. Right? One would be a retributive way. You ask questions like, what rule is broken and what should the consequences be? And it's all focused on the individual who's the supposed offender.
The staff felt proven guilty without trial.
You question your professionalism, everything you've learned, everything you've got.
It's just the most horrendous time of my life and my family's life.
It is a political system. It's target-driven.
Well, there were 3 deaths, 3 separate wards, no real correlation or link between any of them.
But we got to a point that we thought we've got to change the way we do this.
And of course, naturally, we scratch our heads and say, but we don't have a blame culture.
The real challenge is that you cannot buy a just culture off the shelf. It doesn't work that way. Creating a just restorative culture is a hard and long slog.
Thank you, Jos. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Al. What we did, I crowdfunded the film, so it's freely available now for anyone. You can share it, and so it's a 27-minute film. Thank you again to Joe for letting us in with the crew to shoot it. It's a good gut punch, and I think a wonderful, inspiring lesson. There's a lot of hope in that story. So have a good look. I will finish very quickly by showing you a little teaser of some of the results that we're seeing already after pretty much 1 year, 1.5 years of implementing this sort of restorative practice in a large mental health trust. And then Joe can run with that next time you meet. So, number of disciplinary cases. The arrow is when restorative practices were instituted. Boom, right? Number of disciplinary cases plummet. What else do we see? Incidents reported keep going up. That is a good thing. That is a very good thing, right? Because a just, safe culture is a culture that allows the boss to hear bad news, all right? And an unjust, unsafe culture is one in which the boss is not allowed to hear bad news, right? Where you shut it up, where there's downward pressure on honesty and openness and a willingness to disclose. And I'm sure you yourself know the extent to which your organization exerts that downward pressure, right? And what the reasons behind that downward pressure are. But it's bad for safety, it's bad for patient outcomes, it's bad for staff, all right? Remove that downward pressure. I think this is testimony to the removal, the continuous removal of that downward pressure on a willingness to disclose, share, learn. Staff seeking support, the point was made by colleagues earlier that this may well be a very important indicator of the willingness to show vulnerability, that yes, actually I hurt, I need help. We see that go up. So absenteeism, a bane to any HR person in the health system, has gone down. I mean, even if by, what is it, a percentage point, you know, that is significant if you have 9,000 staff, right? So absenteeism down, I think, is a good thing. And I mean, the correlation is pretty obvious. Turnover rate, also a bane of HR people, has at least been able to arrest the increase in turnover, right? There's more work to do. But I mean, it's a complex problem, obviously, turnover, but there's more that we can do there. And of course, if you put, in this case, pounds or dollars or euros on it, it costs you a lot less to not suspend and fire people, all right? Not to mention to have one of them suicide, 1.4 million pounds. So, you know, €1.5 million. That's cash in your pocket that you can do good things with, right? And so there is the money right there. The cost for litigation, things like that, goes down as well. And there is if you want to look at the film or learn more about me or the stuff on this just culture. I'm done. Good? Questions? Thank you.
So we would like you to stand up when you ask a question and talking to the microphone. You want to start? Yes? And you have to stand up. You have your own microphone.
It works, I hope. Yeah. Thank you very much. Very inspiring. As you started talk, I was immediately thinking of our inspectorates. I'm not sure, I think many countries will have an organ as an inspectorate who comes in, and I know that ours in Holland is now very much into this thinking.
I'm on the panel, yeah.
Oh, you're on the panel.
I'm on the panel.
But I think I also read somewhere in one of your papers that it's very hard, or it might be hard to combine your function as an inspectorate or a body that needs to check on stuff and restore at the same time. Could you give us...
Elaborate on this?
Yeah.
There's another film that we made on this. When I look at safety differently. But okay. So obviously, it is really easy to picture a compliance culture, right? Driven by, and in some sense aided and abetted, or at least embodied by an inspectorate, right? Thou shalt comply, vinkenlijstjes, right? Things like that. And put it on a collision course with these ideas. I think that's only good as long as you have the inspector in the room during the discussions. And that's what we do in the proeftuinen in the Netherlands right now, where we're testing these ideas across various hospitals. Not quite as courageously and radically and wholeheartedly as Joe has done, but certainly schoorvoetend, right? Tippy-toeing into it, sort of. And I don't think, again, that there is a substitute for getting those who are tasked with oversight, quality control, including HR, by the way, right? Who was the major engine, in fact, behind the embrace of restorative just culture in Merseycare, in the room. At some point, and this is where I've seen the inspiration come from, they too understand that there are limits to the current model, right? And that just more compliance has no natural enemies, to the point that you need to read for 2,000 years to become an anesthesiologist, right? I mean, that in itself shows the utter ridiculousness of that model, right? That, again, it has no natural enemies. And so for us, and I know that discussion is going on with thuiszorg in this country, for example, right? Too much paperwork. I mean, these insurers want too much accounting rather than accountability and accounts and listening and having a cup of coffee and listening to the accounts. And so I think there is reasonable people will always disagree on what justice means, but I think are sufficiently pragmatic to understand that fresh thinking is required, including the inspectorate. Now, as for the UK inspectorate, yes, you see, Joe, look, okay. You talk about that next time, all right? Because the appetite does vary per country. Yes, okay. Yes, fair enough. Good question.
One more? I failed you last time, huh? So I'll give you the mic now. Could you hand it?
I love the presentation, love the idea of a just culture.
I hear a but coming.
No, it's an and.
It wouldn't have been, anyway,
no,
go.
The and is, you showed a few corollary measures or collateral measures that said in having a just culture, we saw an increase in incidents reported, fewer days of absenteeism. But she also mentioned something along the lines of a rewarding culture, one where you catch people doing right. So at Mercy, or in your model, how are people being caught doing things right, and how is that being propagated?
I'll let Joe answer that one. When it comes to the methodology of testing this, I fully agree that this is incredibly shaky. Right? It is not a randomized controlled trial. This could all be a huge Hawthorne effect. On the other hand, when it comes to just culture and staff well-being, to hell with it, I will embrace the Hawthorne effect with both arms. Right? What is bad in making people feel better about their work, about their environment, about the fact that somebody gives a damn about them and wants to listen to what they have to say? Nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely, but it's not randomized control. Absolutely true. So, Joe, the man needs a mic. But it's a great question. I appreciate it. We should, yeah.
Thank you. So we have spent a lot of time thinking about a reward system. We believe we're the only NHS trust in England who, in their quality accounts, have put staff-related objectives. And those staff-related objectives are about sharing at least 3 good stories every week with staff about positive things. Not taking away from the fact that there's lots of stuff that, learning from failure, but recognizing that either we've got some early catches, which is a good thing, or indeed that we just tell the stories of positive, staff positively living the values, which actually doesn't mean to say that it's always a positive story, but it's a positive story of staff living the values. So that's become a sort of a way of life for us. We've built a microsite for all members of staff to use, the Justin Learning microsite, and a key feature of that is the sort of feel-good factor, not just the sort of the deeper learning issues. We have a monthly employee award. We have a monthly Team of the Month award, and I think what we're seeing on the back of what Sid has done with us is an outbreak of what I describe as healthy competition to do the right thing. Which is always that's a pleasure for a chief executive to experience that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
Next to father and pilot and all that, you're also a
stage prop.
Stage prop. That's a good word.